Welcome to No Holding Back with me, Susan Estrich, the podcast where I bring you the biggest names from the worlds of media, politics, and law. We dive into unfiltered, unapologetic, and insightful conversations. At least we try. I speak my mind and I encourage my guests to do the same. No topic is off limits, and we dive into the issues that shape our world. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by a journalist, Aaron Rupar, who has become a must-read and must-follow for anyone trying to navigate the whirlwind of American politics. He's an independent journalist, the creator of Public Notice, and a relentless tracker of the sound bites and statements that shape the headlines. You might know him from his sharp Twitter threads or his incisive newsletter, both of which have become essential tools for understanding not just what's happening, but why it matters. Aaron Rupar has built a reputation for distilling the noise into clarity. That takes a lot of work. Whether it's analyzing Donald Trump's provocative rallies, the GOP's shifting dynamics, or the broader cultural and political trends in America, Aaron consistently brings insight, context, and a touch of humor to his work. So join me in welcoming the one and only Aaron Rupar to the show. Aaron, thank you so much for joining.
Hi, Susan. Thanks for having me, and thanks for that very nice intro. I appreciate it.
Well, you deserve it. Aaron, how do you distill this noise up there into something sensible? What is Donald Trump doing with his cabinet appointees right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on, and I have some experience doing this now, having covered the first Trump administration as well.
Mhm.
So there's been a little bit of like a mental shift, going from covering the campaign to now covering the developing administration, the cabinet nominees, all of that stuff. And something I try to keep in mind that I learned from covering Trump last time around is that he has a tendency to kind of throw up a lot of to generate a lot of noise. He's posting things on True Social all the time. Many of the things that he says and posts are provocative, but many of the things that he says and posts about do not end up happening. So, you have to
Thank God.
you can kind of whip yourself into hysteria, trying to get outraged about every little thing that he says or posts. And so I think it's important to try and kind of, keep your eyes on the ball. And so, I've been focusing a lot in the newsletter and in my writing on social media on the cabinet nominees, because I think these are, some of the
Yeah.
more consequential decisions that he's making right now. And, I thought that there were kind of two ways that his presidency could have gone this time around. I wasn't really under any illusions that he would take the first path, but I think there was a path where, he could have kind of taken it easy. He's inheriting a strong economy like he did last time around too. He could have nominated kind of experienced, not mainstream, but like at least mainstream within the Republican Party people to run these agencies to serve in his cabinet. But that is not, with the exception of maybe like Marco Rubio at Secretary of State, that's not what he's doing. He's picking kind of the true believers of Trumpism, the Kash Patels, the Pete Hegseths, Matt Gaetz, which obviously flamed out. But even Pam Bondi is someone that he's been associated with for a long time, who he had some corrupt dealings with back when she was the Florida Attorney General. And so, I think we're seeing from these picks that, it's going to be a pretty rocky ride. If Kash Patel ends up being confirmed as FBI director, I expect that he will at least use investigations to harass opponents of Trump, if not, even worse than investigations. And I think we see from putting Tom Homan in charge of border security, that we're going to have some confrontations between the Border Patrol and federal forces and some of these Democratic officials, either at state levels or at local levels, that might be targeted for deportation raids and things like that. So, I'm trying to take this moment here. We have maybe 40, 45 days before he's inaugurated to try and take a little bit of a breath because people are going to be burned out, if they're kind of whipped up into an hysteria at this point. But I think we see from some of the decisions that he's making during this transition period that a lot of the things that he campaigned on were not bluster. I mean, he really intends to weaponize the Department of Justice against his foes. He intends to conduct a mass deportation. He seems to be serious to a point about tariffs. And so, it's going to be a bumpy ride. And like I said, I think it's important for people to know that it's going to be a long haul and to try to kind of get themselves right mentally to be prepared for that.
How do you get right mentally with somebody like Pete Hegseth? I mean, look at that nomination. And he said, what did he say the other day on Megyn Kelly that, you know, Trump told him to get rid of the woke crap in the Department of Defense? I mean, what is that even supposed to mean when you have a guy like Pete Hegseth with a terrible reputation with women is going to get rid of the woke crap? I mean, I know I'm supposed to be calm, but I don't get calm about
Yeah.
that.
Well, I'm certainly not advising people to be calm, but I think we're in an unfortunate situation where this is really up to the Republican senators. I mean, there's only so much Democrats can do. We can try to, make it so that there's a political price to be paid if Pete Hegseth is confirmed by kind of highlighting that, hey, he said that women shouldn't be in combat roles. He cheated on both of his wives and basically had children, out of wedlock twice over. He's been
All three
accused of
wives, I
rape. I
think he
mean,
cheated on, didn't he?
well, he's on his third now. He's on wife
Oh,
number three
okay. So
now.
we don't
So,
know if he's cheated on the third yet. I guess
and
that's
I don't think there's been any reporting. Give it a week, and we'll see. If people come forward, because it seems like it's entered that zone where there are new revelations coming out almost on a daily basis about Pete at this point. But so I'm not advising that people be calm, but I think we need to be clear-eyed with what we can and can't accomplish. As people who are opposed to Trump at this point. And I think what you can accomplish is trying to highlight the unfitness and unsuitability of some of these nominees so that if they are confirmed, Republicans are in a position to pay a political price for confirming them. But there's nothing that Democrats can do. I mean, there's 53 Republican senators. So what that means is it's going to take 4 Republican senators to vote no on these nominees for them to go down. And, that may end up being the case. It seems like with Pete, there's some squishiness. I mean, even Joni Ernst from Iowa, who serves on the Armed Forces Committee, she was on Fox News this morning, expressing reservations, not committing to supporting Pete, and she's a key vote in all of this. So, I think the Pete one seems kind of imperiled, but it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of mobilized opposition at this point to Kash Patel, which in some ways I think is just as scary as Pete.
why
But
not? Why
yeah.
not, Aaron? Why isn't there opposition organized to him? I mean, he is as scary as Pete, and he's got the Justice Department, which is pretty scary thought.
Yeah, I mean, and Kash Patel just a couple of years ago wrote a book listing, a few dozen officials that he wanted to target. In a hypothetical at that point, Trump administration 2.0, including a bunch of Democrats, including people like Robert Mueller, some of the anti-Trump Republicans who've spoken out in recent years. I think the difference is that there's kind of a sense that Patel at least has a resume that kind of passes the smell test. He's been a longtime bureaucrat. He served in a variety of roles during the first Trump administration. So there's at least a sense where you can kind of look at his resume and he checks some of the boxes. He doesn't have the allegations of personal misconduct, although he has a long litany and history of grifting and kind of selling some of these weird products that people in Trump world like to sell. In his case, he was selling, boots and scarves he associates himself with Steve Bannon, and on Steve Bannon's show, he's talked about weaponizing the Trump administration 2.0 against Democrats and harassing them through investigations and prosecutions. And so it's scary stuff, but I think at least Republicans who want to support him can say that he's qualified. Whereas with Pete, he doesn't have the qualifications. I mean, this is the guy whose most recent job was on Fox News. He ran a couple nonprofit groups that he ran for veterans into the ground, as we've recently read about in the New Yorker and Jane Mayer's reporting. So I think that, is kind of the difference. And I think there's also a sense, and I don't know if this was strategic on Trump's part, but when you toss out, Matt Gaetz as a nominee, and then you toss out Pete Hegseth as a nominee, at a certain point, you can't really raise a, 5 alarm fire about each one of these. It's just kind of exhausting. And so, Gates obviously didn't make it even more than a week, and it seems like Hegseth is kind of on the ropes, but I don't really get the sense that there's anything, besides kind of the obvious danger of a Kash Patel and the terrible things that he will do if he is confirmed as FBI director, that is going to, kind of give Republicans or mobilize, the critical mass of Republicans to vote him down. But it should be mentioned with Patel, of course, that there is a current FBI director right now, Chris Wray, who was handpicked by Trump after he fired Jim Comey back in 2017. And so, there's going to be more to this story in that, Trump is first going to have to fire Christopher Wray after he's inaugurated and then nominate Kash Patel. There's going to be opportunities, I think, with Patel to kind of throw up red flags and to, kind of play politics with the nomination. beyond just kind of this transition period. But again, I think the difference is just that there's a sense that he's more qualified than Pete Hegseth is or Matt Gaetz was.
It's unbelievable. I mean, Pete Hegseth was a Fox News host. He knows how to go on television and advertise the president. But whoever thought that was the job description for Secretary of Defense, that you'd be good on television defending the president and doing advertisements for his anti-trans policy? I mean, it's sort of outrageous to think that's the qualification for being Secretary of Defense. And yet with this guy, it is.
I mean, you're right that it's outrageous, but we just saw a presidential campaign where Trump was talking about mass deportations. He was talking about military tribunals for Liz Cheney. He was mocking trans people at every single one of his rallies. Like, we're kind of through the looking glass here. I mean, this is a guy who, since he incited a coup attempt and left office in 2021, was found liable for sexual assault, was convicted of felonies. Like, yeah, I mean, Pete Hegseth is unsuited, but so is Trump. And, we kind of have to live with the choices that voters made to elect this guy. And so, I think that's kind of a hard thing for, people who are opposed to Trump, for Democrats to kind of wrap their minds around. I know it is for me that, a guy like Pete Hegseth is so obviously unsuited, and it's so absurd to pluck someone from Fox News to be the Secretary of Defense. And, Trump, I think it's 10 plus people he's already named for administration roles who were on Fox in one form or
I
another,
know.
either
Well,
as
so was
hosts or as
I, and he hasn't
contributors.
paid me anything. I was on for 20 years. And I should be
Oh,
in.
okay. Wow.
No, I know. House liberal. I lasted a long time. How do you get your head around it, Aaron? I mean, watching this election, how do you get your head around the fact that Donald Trump, with all you say about him and the making fun of people and the, you know, out of sight rhetoric, how did he win?
Boy, I still don't know if I've really figured that out. I mean, I think that the conventional wisdom, which I believe to an extent, is that, people are really mad about the economy. People are mad about inflation. People were mad about immigration. I think there was a sense that these past 4 years under the Biden presidency were kind of disappointing. Now, for me, I mean, I kind of look at it and I thought that given what Biden inherited in January 2021, I thought he did a really good job kind of getting the country back on its feet, getting vaccines distributed so we could kind of get through COVID, and then getting the job market going again to get unemployment down to historic lows. GDP growth has been good. The stock market has been good. But we hadn't really lived through an inflationary period in the US for like 50 years. And I think the thing that I learned as just someone who, covers politics for a living is that inflation really makes people mad because it affects everyone. The unemployment rate ticks up a little bit. And that maybe affects 1 to 2% of people in the workforce. But anybody who spends money is going to experience inflation, and it's going to annoy them. Slash, really provide cause hardships in their lives if they can't afford the groceries they're used to buying or things like that. Now, obviously, every country in the developed world had inflation, and just about every country in the developed world ended up throwing out incumbent parties as kind of a product of that. So there were forces that go beyond kind of our domestic politics that I think hurt Kamala Harris and helped Trump. Trump, despite the fact that he was president once before, was able to kind of position himself as the outsider change candidate. And I think Harris ended up being saddled with some of the baggage of the Biden years and the frustrations over the economy and things like that. So I really think that was a big part of it. But, I think you also have to think back on when we came out of the DNC in August. There was a period where Kamala Harris was ahead by 4 or 5 points in the
Right.
polls. And so a lot of these analyses after the fact that are like, oh, she was doomed because of inflation and because of the anti-incumbent backlash that we've seen globally. Nobody was saying that in August and September. And so, something kind of happened this fall, I think, that helped Trump. I think there were some messaging errors on the Democratic side. I mean, I think one that's been kind of underrated that I've talked about a little bit, at least on social media, is when the Hurricane Helene hit, the southeast of the country in early
Mhm.
October. Kamala kind of pulled herself off the campaign trail to do vice presidential duties, to go down there and tour affected areas, to do kind of, very traditional news conferences, things like that. And there was, basically a 2 week period where Trump and Republicans had, clear runway to spread conspiracy theories about FEMA, to allege that, Biden was intentionally sabotaging the response to hurt Republicans in Republican areas. And I think that it was really kind of an error not to have someone like a Mitch Landrieu or one of these talented communicators who was part of the administration out there holding daily press briefings, really getting a message out, getting in front of some of these conspiracy theories. And I think that kind of reflects sort of messaging issues that I've seen throughout the Biden years, where it just felt like too often Democrats are being reactive and not proactive, and not really kind of making an effort to get out there and engage with the public, to kind of set the agenda and the narrative for what the administration was doing instead of being having Republicans attack them and then respond to the attacks. Well, oftentimes people only see the attacks; they're not necessarily
Right.
hearing what you're saying in response to it. Now, would any of that have changed the result? I'm
Right.
not sure about that, but I do think there's been a lot of analysis that has kind of reduced the whole situation down to incumbents lost all over the globe, and because of inflation, Kamala Harris was doomed. And I just think we need to be honest that nobody was saying that, in August and September when it looked like she was on track to win. And I don't necessarily believe the polling was wrong. So it's a very complex topic. I mean, we could probably talk about it all day, but I think a lot of it was the economic forces and just the fact that Trump was able to position himself as an outsider.
And does he have a mandate now, Aaron?
Well, so I mean, when we look at it, he ended up winning the popular vote by just over 1%. It ended
Right.
up being the narrowest split, I think, since 2000, right? At least. So, we're looking at the closest presidential race that we've had in decades. The Senate, which was a very tough map for Democrats, ended up with 53 Republican senators. And then the House is going to be just a 5 vote margin. And it's going to be even more narrow than that in the short term because of some of the House Republicans who are taking jobs in the administration.
Right.
So, in one sense, it's a very narrow result. In the other sense, Donald Trump won all of the swing states, all 7 of them, and Republicans have a trifecta. So when you kind of look at it, both sides, I think, have ammo here to, either claim that this was a really close election or claim that there was a mandate. I do think that Trump is going to have, the wind at his back for some of his economic policies in terms of tax cuts, border security. I think since that was such a
Mass
key issue.
deportations, Aaron? I mean, are we really
I
going
mean,
to
he
see
very
mass
explicitly ran on
deportations?
mass deportations. That one kind of falls into a tricky zone in that, this was a centerpiece of his campaign. Every single rally that he gave, every interview that he did, he talked about mass deportations and the need to do it. It polled decently, even among Latino communities, it was close to being a 50-50 sort of proposition in terms of whether or not people support it. Now, I think when they actually occur, if it ends up being kind of like an Elian Gonzalez situation where you have, raids that, go into people's homes and they're taking kids' parents who aren't citizens, even though the kids are citizens, I don't necessarily think that people are going to be fans of that. But I also wouldn't be shocked, if we see a Gallup poll a week after there's some sort of deportation raid in Chicago or something like that, and we see that it polls decently. I even was kind of thinking about this yesterday in the context of the healthcare executive who was murdered in New York City, where I was surprised by the reaction on the left, especially where, this is kind of the far fringes of the left, but some people who are kind of like, mainstream commentators who seem to almost be running with the narrative that this person had it coming because of people being denied healthcare. And it just seems like there's a lot of like people are kind of becoming unmoored from what I was raised to believe are sort of traditional concepts of right and wrong. And so, in the context of mass deportation, like it would not shock me, if there are kind of these brutal mass deportations with raids into democratic states and cities where, we come out the other end of that and it polls decently well, and Trump doesn't really suffer much in terms of approval ratings or political standing. So, I think myself, I'm trying to kind of adjust to that new reality. And yesterday was another example of that, where it's like, wow, there's a lot of anger and, kind of, just kind of unglued mentality out there, where people there's like a certain sort of bloodlust. I think we see it on the fringes on both sides, but with mass deportation, again, it polls decently well. So I mean, we'll have to wait and see.
Wait and see. Isn't that a scary thought, though? Wait and see if we're going to round up people and separate families. And I mean, he's really going to do that, isn't he?
It seems like it. We have to keep in mind with Tom Homan, who is the quote unquote border czar, that he doesn't have a real, like, border czar is not a real job.
Dog.
He's not confirmed. So I mean, Homan, it seems like his job is to go on right-wing TV and kind of, feed red meat to the base, talking about how, he might round up these Democratic mayors or governors if they don't comply, or, he's been talking lately about some statute that criminalizes, harboring undocumented immigrants, and I've seen kind of people on the left pointing out this is almost like becoming like an Anne Frank situation where he's threatening that if you put an undocumented immigrant in your attic so that they can escape mass deportation, that then you're at risk of prosecution as well. But like, talk is kind of cheap on cable news, especially in right-wing cable news where no one ever pushes back on these Republicans. What is that actually going to look like when the rubber meets the road? I've seen even Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, when he's been asked about this in more mainstream forums, his talking point has been that Trump is going to go after the undocumented immigrants who have been convicted of crimes, which is something that Democrats of both parties have done. So I still think there's a possibility where this ends up being kind of a more limited thing, and Trump just kind of declares victory on it. I wouldn't totally foreclose that because when you go that next step of really kind of mobilizing federal forces to go into areas where they're not wanted with officials either at the local or state level who are telling them not to, like that becomes kind of a dangerous situation for obvious reasons. And I'm not totally sure that Trump wants to jeopardize his political standing going to that level right away. But, it seems like the telegraphing from the Republicans who'd be in a position to know who are in frequent communication with Trump is that, it's going to start with kind of a more limited effort to deport criminal aliens, as they put it. And then, we'll kind of see from there. But, Trump very explicitly talked about deporting as many as like 15 million
I know.
people, which it would pretty much be every single undocumented immigrant in the country. And that would have obviously a lot of, beyond the humanitarian and moral aspects, a lot of economic impacts as well, including economic impacts that, right wing, that companies, including, Republican executives have been warning about, that this would be bad for the economy. So I don't know if he necessarily wants to kind of like, spike inflation by deporting all the agricultural workers right away. But we're sort of, again, there is a sense in which he's a lame duck. He's not supposed to be able to run for a third term. We'll see if there's an
I
effort
hope
to
not.
amend the Constitution. There's been some talk of that, on the far right. But as a lame duck, will he be more willing to kind of jeopardize his political standing in the short term to accomplish some of these things that he campaigned on? I'm just not sure about that. But we have to think back that when he was inaugurated the first time, of course, they tried to implement a form of the Muslim ban right away that led to people kind of storming the airports in protest. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a similar effort at kind of a shock and awe thing right out of the gates. And it seems like deportation would be an area where, Trump could try to, kind of have these showy deportations rounding people up to try and right out of the gates, have a promise made and a promise kept.
Who are the Republicans you watch? You make the point, and I couldn't agree with you more, that we Democrats, other than tearing our hair out, don't have a lot of power right now to stop much of what Trump wants to do. Who are the Republicans you're watching and expecting to hold him in line or not hold him in line?
Yeah, I mean, so as we talk about these nominees, the Senate Republicans that people have been looking at are people like Lisa Murkowski up in Alaska, Susan Collins. Those are the two. I mean, Joni Ernst, which we talked about earlier in the Hegseth context, is a key one. The fact is, though, I mean, a lot of these people that remember from last time around are no longer there. I mean, Mitt Romney just gave his
Right.
farewell address yesterday.
Right.
He's out of there. We don't have a John McCain, obviously, or even like a Jeff Flake.
Nope.
So, again, when you look at kind of the math of this, to stall Trump's initiatives, we're going to need four Senate Republicans to vote with the Democrats. Well, you have Murkowski and Collins. There's two. Rubio would be one that under normal circumstances people might look at as someone who's been a slightly more moderate, at least in terms of like foreign policy and national defense. But of course, he's becoming the Secretary of State, so he's not going to vote down like a Pete Hegseth when he's joining the administration. So I don't think we can really expect that. So beyond that, it's kind of unclear to me. I mean, if I thought through all 53 of the Republican senators, there are a few that are regarded as being slightly more moderate. But are they going to kind of risk their political hide, to tank one of Trump's nominees? I'm not sure about that, especially when you need two of them in addition to Murkowski and Collins, and especially with the fact that Elon Musk has his America PAC and, has been very explicit that he's going to keep this running, even into 2025 and into 2026 to possibly fund primary challenges of Republicans who aren't in line with the agenda. So, you'd have to look at kind of the Senate Republican map and which Republicans in 2026 that would be relevant for. But there really isn't that sort of moderate faction of Senate Republicans that there was last time around, and in part that's because we're 8 years into Trumpism, and Trump has obviously made a really concerted effort to purge those people from the party. And so, the people who are left at this point are mostly the true believers. Now, I mean, I guess it could be interesting with a guy like a Mitch McConnell, who at
Yeah.
times has
Can
opposed
you
Trump,
believe
is no
we're
longer in
hoping for
leadership.
Mitch McConnell, Aaron? I mean, did you ever think you would be pining your hopes on Mitch McConnell?
Yeah, and I've seen some informed talk that, McConnell could be an interesting vote on a guy like Hegseth, given that, one of McConnell's big points of contention with Trump has been on foreign policy, supporting Ukraine, for instance, which McConnell has made
Right.
almost like a legacy item of his. And Trump is not really interested in doing any longer, because Hegseth has pretty much been on board with the Trumpian line of Ukraine has to kind of rely on Europe going forward for aid. And, that Trump seems at least kind of agnostic on Putin, if not pro-Putin. And
Right.
McConnell is not. I mean, could McConnell vote to tank a guy like Hegseth? I mean, maybe. But then even under again, we'd still need one more even in addition to that. So I'm just not sure. I think that the guardrails in that sense that were there last time around aren't. And this was part of what, Democrats tried to campaign on was the warning that, especially given, again, the Supreme Court, the immunity ruling that we had there, that this is going to be a version of Trump that is a lot less constrained that he was last time around. And people, heard the argument and didn't really buy it for one reason or another, or thought that, they were so upset about the economy that it was worth kind of risking it all to, return Trump to power. And as a result, we're just going to have to live in this world for at least 2 years where, Democrats are kind of in the wilderness playing politics, but that's all we can really do. Of course, with the exception being that the House is so narrowly divided that, if there's even one or two House Republicans, maybe from New York, from California, from these more blue purple states, that if they break with the agenda, then legislatively that poses problems for Trump. But at this stage of the game, we're talking about these nominees. It's a pretty uphill fight.
What about the media, Aaron? I saw Jeff Bezos this week was at the New York Times Deal Book Summit, and he was talking nice about Trump. And of course, he's blocked the Washington Post endorsement of Kamala Harris. Has the media turned soft? Is it turning soft? Is it going to give Trump his way, or are they, in fact, going to stand up to him?
Seems like the media has gone pretty soft. I mean, the example that I was paying a lot of attention to this morning is Morning Joe, which I'm sure people have kind of followed that, Joe and Mika went down to Mar-a-Lago a few weeks ago to meet with Trump, which apparently was the first time they had talked to him in, since like 2017, I think they said. And then there was a very curious episode earlier this week where David Frum, who was on the show, was talking about Pete Hegseth and made a comment about Hegseth's drinking, basically saying that if you're too drunk for Fox News, you're really drunk or something like that. And then Mika, on the next segment, basically, almost offered like an apology or kind of like a clarification that that Frum's comments didn't really stand for the editorial line of the show and that they're good
Are you
people at
kidding?
Fox
I
News.
hadn't heard
What's that?
that. She's
Yes, it's
defending,
just
attacking David Frum for taking on Pete Hegseth. That's pretty
yes,
amazing.
I posted a clip last night on my Twitter account of Mika saying essentially that they're good people at Fox and that we shouldn't paint everybody with that brush, that Frum was kind of suggesting that drinking is rampant at Fox News. And then today, just this morning, Joe had about a 10-minute rant. I posted the entire thing on Twitter, basically saying that for anybody who says that they're afraid of Trump and that this is, them kind of channeling fear by defending Fox News, that's not the case, that, they're just trying to be civil. But this is kind of, I think, indicative of where the media is at. I've been a little nauseated reading, sort of the the Maggie Haberman gossip stories, which we're back, publishing almost every day about the intrigue around Trump and the hot gossip in Trump world. We all remember these from last time around. And, I think it was kind of novel back in 2017, 18, because we weren't used to politics being kind of a reality show. And then, we went back into the Biden years where politics was more boring and kind of normal. And I'm just not sure that the appetite among audiences of these publications is going to be there for this sort of coverage. You mentioned Bezos and the Washington Post and the, Bezos spiking the endorsement of Kamala Harris. Well, after that, it was something like 10 to 20% of paid subscribers canceled their subscriptions. I mean, the numbers were out there in the weeks following that. And, I just think that that was kind of a canary in the coal mine that people, are kind of fed up. I mean, the audiences for these publications and for Morning Joe are mostly liberals. They're mostly
Right.
left wing people. And so, at a certain point, I think people who have seen these publications kind of undermine their political interests in the sense that they have, pushed kind of false equivalencies that make Trump and Biden look like two sides of the same coin, or they've sort of soft pedaled some of Trump's unprecedented corruption and criminality. You can only do that for so long and kind of have plausible deniability before people get fed up with it. And I think people are kind of fed up. I was kind of bracing myself running the little Substack that I run after the election that there would be a big dip in subscribers just from people being kind of disengaged and not wanting to pay attention to politics. And I do get emails almost every day from readers kind of saying, it's not you, it's me. I just need to sort of tune out of politics for a little while for my own mental health. But actually, the subscribers, to my Substack and to other progressive Substacks has continued to grow after the election. And so I think there's been, people kind of looking to reallocate their media dollars a little bit, who might be fed up with kind of the tone and content of the New York Times and Washington Post, but still want to pay attention to the news through trusted voices. But Morning Joe's audience has tanked as a result of them announcing that they went and met with Trump. And I do think people are fed up, but I haven't really gotten the sense yet that these outlets are really going to stand up to Trump in any meaningful sense. It just kind of, to me, feels like more of the same sort of coverage that we got, the 4 years that Trump was in power the first time around.
And that coverage was cozy, it seemed to me. I mean, reporters were angling to be inside the Trump administration and to get the full story of what Trump was thinking and doing, and they played right into his hand. Am I wrong?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that that's a little bit of a natural instinct. If you're someone like a Maggie Haberman or like a Caitlin Collins at CNN, where you're trying to break stories about what Trump is doing. And so, like, you have to curry favor to an extent. Like, otherwise, you're just not going to have sources, who are sharing information with you that's useful. No, that's, I think, where people like I come in, people who are more on the outside who don't have access. I mean, I think we can be a little more unvarnished in our commentary and coverage because we're not trying to curry favor. But I think within the media ecosystem, there has to be kind of room for both. Like, it's good that we know what's going on. Now, there are better and worse ways, I think, of doing that. But, and a lot of these stories that we're seeing about, for instance, this week, the reporting about, oh, if Pete Hegseth goes down in flames, Ron DeSantis is the plan B choice for defense secretary. I mean, this is sort of gossip stories again, where, apparently Trump put out some feelers to DeSantis at an event that they were both at in Florida, and they talked a little bit. Is that, currying favor with Trump to report that? I'm not totally sure that it is, but, you obviously have to be on the inside to get that information in the first place. So, I'm not one of these people that's kind of reflexively bashing these outlets. I've just noted on social media in my newsletter that it is a little bit nauseating, and it kind of gives you, it's almost like having PTSD. It's like flashbacks, reading the latest hot gossip out of Mar-a-Lago, where it's like, man, I really thought we kind of put this in the rearview mirror, but, we're in for at least 4 more years of it, sadly.
And, you know, I think that I remember I'm older than you back in 1980 when Reagan came to town and he had a mandate. There was no question he did. And the Democrats went into hiding and didn't know what to do. And there were, they voted his budget in and they just collapsed. And there's this feeling right now that Democrats don't have a game plan, and there is no game plan for Democrats. The only game plan is for Republicans and for the media. And I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I know so many Democrats who say they're politicked out, that this campaign has done them in, and that Trump's election has done them in. And I don't know what to say in response.
Yeah, I mean, that feels true to me. And I think that it's also kind of inevitable when you lose an election like this. I mean, for instance, like there isn't really a party leader right now. I mean, nor could there be. It's going to be a result of, as people start kind of jockeying for 2028, we'll see who emerges, or, as we start to get into these hearings with the confirmation hearings slash, if Trump is pushing a new tax cut bill and their hearings about that, we'll have to see what stars kind of emerge and who emerges as sort of the leading voices of the party. But the party's adrift. I mean, this was a devastating loss, despite the fact that, as we talked about earlier, it was pretty close. I mean, it came down to basically like 150,000 votes across the key swing states that swung the whole thing. So it wasn't like it was, a 1980 Reagan landslide where he won, like 55%. Trump won't win a majority, obviously. Um, but, I think that's kind of natural. And I think, we see people like Jared Polis, the governor in Colorado, who, has been very, I don't know, friendly is the right word, but, he posted a tweet kind of expressing support for RFK Jr. as the HHS boss. And then, even last night he was tweeting about how he supports Elon Musk and Vivek in their efforts to kind of streamline government. And so I've seen more of that than kind of the opposite of kind of mobilizing, the total resistance. And, I mean, we think back on 2017 when Trump was inaugurated, there was the Women's March, the very next day. And then about a week later, when Trump tried to implement the Muslim ban, the protests that took place at airports that were very spontaneous, but also, were very large and effective in mobilizing public opinion against what Trump was trying to do. I've seen some commentary that's kind of said that, oh, people are exhausted. There won't be any of that sort of protest this time around. I think it's a little bit too early to say that. I think we'll have to kind of wait and see once Trump is inaugurated. If he does try, some sort of big deportation right away, I'm sure there will be people who take to the streets to protest that because, we are a very narrowly divided country. And, obviously the Democratic brand in a lot of these cities is waning, but it still remains very strong. And Trump has never, been able to get a majority of the vote, even though he came very close this time. So, yeah, I mean, I think, when you lose an election like this, and you have an outgoing president in Joe Biden, who obviously is kind of departing the scene at this point, there isn't a party leader that people can kind of rally around at this point. And that's just the moment that we're in politically. But, to the extent that Democrats are kind of speaking out publicly, most of it that I'm seeing is, I don't want to say like, favorable towards Trump, but at least trying to find areas where possibly, someone like a Ro Khanna, who also has been tweeting in favor of, the efforts of Elon and Vivek. It seems like they're trying to find areas where they can work together instead of kind of mobilize, complete opposition at this point.
Who do you see as the Democratic leaders, Aaron?
Boy, that's a really tough question right now. I mean, you could look at someone like an AOC. I saw that she is now going for a leadership role on one of the committees as the top Democrat, I believe, on the oversight committee. So she, her star seems to be kind of rising. Although, it's difficult because a lot of the further left progressive Democrats didn't really outperform Kamala Harris whatsoever. And many of them kind of, Kamala Harris got more votes in Vermont than Bernie Sanders, for instance. And I believe she also outperformed AOC in AOC's congressional district. So, would it be someone like a Shapiro in Pennsylvania, who has a record of success and, has some appeal to progressives, but also to more of the middle of the party? I'm not sure. I mean, that's kind of one of the tricky aspects of this where, if we had talked 3 months ago after the DNC, there was all sorts of talk coming out of the DNC about, oh my goodness, look at how deep the Democratic bench is. They had 4 days of speakers and, there are all these people they couldn't even find a speaking slot for who are rising stars in their own right. To kind of go from that to months later after this election being in a moment where it's like, who even are the leaders of the party? It's certainly, I think, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama still have that sort of star power, but this is 2 cycles now where, they were out there campaigning both for Hillary really aggressively in 2016. And then this cycle, Michelle Obama, I thought, gave one of the most memorable speeches of the whole cycle when she, basically implored men not to betray the women in their lives by voting for Trump. And, obviously that message didn't carry the day. And so go ahead.
No, I said that didn't work.
No, it didn't. Yeah, it didn't work. And so that's kind of a tough place to be. So again, I think we just need to have a little bit of patience and understand that we're in a moment in politics where Democrats are a little bit in the wilderness right now, but that won't last forever. And as soon as we see, the new Congress sworn in and some of these hearings begin, we can think back where Kamala Harris was one of the big stars in 2017. If you think back on the Jeff Sessions confirmation hearing where she had a line of questioning about him lying about his contacts with the Russian government during the campaign, that played a key role in Sessions later recusing himself from the Russia investigation, which, ended up leading to Comey being fired and everything that kind of flowed from that. So, I mean, there's going to be opportunities soon, I think, for Democrats to kind of plant their flag as being a leader of the party. But we're just in a moment right now where I think we're all kind of licking our wounds a little bit.
Do you think Kamala Harris has a future in the Democratic Party? I've been with a lot of Democratic nominees who lost and they had no future. And it seemed to me that the Democratic Party is not very welcoming to nominees who lose the election. But is Kamala Harris different?
There's been some talk of her running for governor
I
in
know.
California, which I think would be as soon as in 2026.
Yeah.
I mean, if she ended up being the nominee, I'm sure that she would win. And I've seen some people make the comparison with Richard Nixon because this was very close to the track that he took after he lost in 1960, where he ended up running for governor and then kind of using that as a platform to get back into the national scene. I don't really see her being the candidate in 2028, but I don't know who that candidate would be. So I guess I don't want to, kind of, put dirt on her that she couldn't be the candidate, but I just think that, she ran in 2020. She ended up, it was some of the same issues, I think, kind of both times, where in 2020, as soon as she had to really develop a healthcare message, the message that she came out with sounded so focus grouped, and she kind of, it was this torture position that tried to not alienate the Medicare for all people, but also,
Right.
not alienate more of the moderate wing of the party, and just ended up not really pleasing anyone, and that sort of led to her downfall, where the moment that she had leading the polling was very fleeting, and she got out of the race even before the Iowa caucus, and then this time, I thought she had a really strong start, but I thought when she had to kind of develop an economic platform, that part of it felt kind of wanting from day one to me. When she started talking about the opportunity economy, again, it felt very kind of focus grouped, and that there wasn't a lot of meat on the bone. It was kind of more talking points to me than like actual policies. So, and maybe that's just kind of who she is as a politician, as someone who, obviously she demonstrated that she's a very effective debater. She has that prosecutor background, and, obviously brings a lot of, the potential of being the first woman and woman of color president, I thought, was meaningful in its own right. But, maybe on policy isn't quite the person for the moment in terms of, running for president. So, I don't think, if I had to wager on it, I would not expect her to be the Democratic nominee in 2028, nor would I actually expect her to run, but I could see her getting back in maybe as governor of California. If there's ever a Senate seat, which I don't see anytime soon, but like getting back into the Senate from California, I wouldn't rule something like that out, but I would be surprised. It's too early to say, but I'd be surprised.
You'd be surprised. What's your advice to young activists right now? Because I have some of them who listen and who say to me, "What do you want us to do?" And I'm sure they should read you if they don't already. Hopefully, they're listening. You'll give us all your tags, public notices, your newsletter. You give us your tags for Twitter. What do you tell them to do? Sitting
So,
tight is a hard thing to
yeah, I
do.
mean, I should kind of preface my comments by saying, my background is more, I'm a journalist and not an activist per se. So, I don't really have like training, in that realm, but I think it's important to fight the battles that are right in front of you. So, right now we're looking at these nominees. Shortly we'll be looking at Republican legislation in terms of if they're going to do more tax cuts for the rich, or are they going to try to repeal the ACA? There's already been talk of kind of gutting the safety net. But I think you have to focus on what's right in front of you. So right now it's these nominees. That's kind of the battle of the hour. The other thing, like kind of more globally, is that I think people can kind of get too worked up over things that Trump might do. I talked about this at the beginning, where like one of his political strategies is to say 10 outrageous things and then not do nine of them, kind of deal. And that sort of creates this perception that his opponents are hysterical, that they have Trump derangement syndrome. So you have to kind of keep your eye on the ball and look more at what he's doing than what he's saying, because he says all sorts of crazy stuff all the time. So, I would advise people to not, as someone, I do think I have some expertise in terms of covering Trump. I've been doing it for a long time now, to pay more attention to what he's doing, not what he's saying. Don't get hysterical about every post that he puts out there on social media. This whole conversation about, is he going to try to annex Canada? I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, that's not going to happen. It's just trolling people. But also to keep it manageable, you have to look at the things that are right in front of you. Now we can forecast based on what he campaigned on and what he has stated even in the transition period, that he's going to come for cuts to the safety net. He's going to probably try and make another go at repealing the ACA. There will certainly be more tax cuts that are skewed towards the rich. So I don't want people to be in denial that this is what's coming, but I think for these next 6 to 8 weeks, I guess more like 4 to 6 weeks, we're looking at these nominees to the cabinet, which are really bad nominees. Most of them. I mean, again, there's you can put maybe in one bucket a guy like a Marco Rubio, who at least seems
Right.
to be qualified for it. But then you have the Hegseths, the Kash Patels, and again, be clear-eyed that we don't have the power on our own to submarine these nominees on our own. But like you have to put Republicans in a position where they're going to pay a political price. And so I think that's kind of getting out there with messaging about why Pete Hegseth is bad, why he would be an irresponsible choice to put in charge of the Defense Department. And so, if there are Republicans who in the Senate who are facing tough fights in 2026, that this ends up being something that dogs them, that puts Democrats in a better position the next opportunity they have to retake power, because that's really all you can do.
All you can do. What about Pam Bondi? You mentioned her at the outset. What's her story?
So her story is that at least again, there's a little bit of the Kash Patel thing where at least she's qualified. I mean, she was the Florida Attorney General, and she's been a lawyer for decades now, and so she's kind of well known, especially in Florida. And there are some Democrats in Florida, in fairness, who I don't want to say hold her in high esteem, but at least have worked with her. She had a commission she put together looking into some of the pharmaceutical companies, that she actually put a Democrat who had ran against her for AG in a leading role on one of these committees. And I saw this person kind of praising her as at least someone that he was able to deal with. Now, she had very corrupt dealings with Trump back in 2015, where
What
when
would
Trump was under yeah, so when Trump was under fire for Trump University and basically defrauding students with this for-profit college, there are a number of states, including New York, that ended up investigating this. And I believe it advanced pretty far in New York, where so this was a pretty in-depth investigation. There was a similar case in Florida with people in Florida who had been defrauded, and Bondi ended up dropping the investigation after Trump had donated, I believe it was $25,000 to a PAC that she was associated with. So it seemed like an extremely corrupt quid pro quo that there's never really been an explanation for, beyond kind of the obvious. And so in a normal world, if this was a Democrat president-elect and a state attorney general who had been, kind of investigating their company, you had given money to them and then they dropped an investigation into you or your business that you were running at the time, like that would probably be enough.
That would
But this
be
is one
enough.
of the asymmetries that we face where, corruption, we saw this, the fact that Trump, if you think back to the first presidential transition after he won in 2016, and what a big deal it was that he was not divesting from his businesses. We remember the press conference that he gave next to the folders with the blank sheets of paper that supposedly outlined his plan to divest, which he never did. And now we don't even hear a peep about that, because it's like people just take for granted. Of course, he's going to run his business while he's in office, or at least have his kids do it, who are his main advisors. And this is just the Bondi thing is another example where this was egregious corruption, that in a normal world would disqualify her from being, considered as Attorney General of the United States. But, I'm sure it will come up at her confirmation hearing. She'll have to answer for it. Do I anticipate that this is going to tank her nomination? I don't think so. And I think this is also, whether this was intentional or not on Trump's part, the fact that he nominated Matt Gaetz, who was so manifestly unfit and unqualified, and then he steps aside, and then he brings in Pam Bondi, who compared to Gaetz seems like a downright normal choice. I think that works to her benefit.
And it seems to me that by throwing out the Pete Hegseths and the Matt Gaetzes of the world, there's only so many times the Republicans are going to stop him. And for every one he loses, he's going to win one more. And we're going to see radical appointments that we would normally reject. And we're not going to reject them. I mean, that's sort of what future holds. And you wonder, is a Pam Bondi going to keep a Kash Patel in line, or is he going to just run loose with this promise he's made to go after the media?
Yeah, I mean, I would not expect Pam Bondi to be able to keep Kash Patel in line. In terms of going after the media, I mean, it's a little. I don't know exactly what form that's going to take. Sometimes in situations like this, the investigations themselves are the punishment. He wouldn't have to go to the extent of, fulfilling Trump's talk of pulling CBS off the airwaves because they edited a Kamala Harris interview. I don't think things like that are going to happen, but, it could be as simple as, kind of nuisance investigations that sort of badger. I mean, like we're seeing with Morning Joe, where like, part of the reporting, I think it was CNN's Brian Stelter who reported that part of the reason that they went down to Mar-a-Lago was that they personally were fearful of Trump returning to power and making their lives miserable, investigating them, things like that. And so you get kind of this compliance in advance, which we saw with Mika, doing this apology to Fox News for a comment that was made that really didn't seem like anything worthy of apologizing for. So, I don't think that it's going to be like suddenly, January 20th is going to arrive and we're going to be in a police state. I don't think it's going to be quite that drastic, but, it could be as simple as kind of, again, opening investigations that, kind of tone down, force these outlets to tone down their coverage a little bit. But you're right. I mean, I think Hegseth is in trouble still. Obviously, Matt Gaetz went down. I don't really get the sense that Patel is in that much danger. And, if it ends up being someone like a Ron DeSantis instead of a Pete Hegseth, I'm sure he would be confirmed as well. But, again, elections have consequences. And this is apparently what the people wanted.
Let me ask you one last question. You've been such a fabulous guest. How do you get up in the morning every day and get ready for this battle? I mean, knowing that you're going to go out there, you're going to criticize Trump. The criticism is going to fall mostly on deaf ears, and he's going to get away with most of what he wants. How do you keep yourself going?
Well, it honestly is a little difficult right now because I think that, for people like me or anybody who kind of works in sort of the influencer space, journalism / influencer, when you're a progressive, and you have an election result like we just had, I mean, it certainly feels like a failure. And obviously the failure goes way beyond my work or, Morning Joe's work or any one person's capability. It probably even goes beyond Kamala Harris and what she was capable of accomplishing, as the candidate. But, I've had to kind of mentally, and I think this is still kind of a work in progress, kind of shift from better things are possible mode to like, let's contain the fire to this one building mode, where, I've had to kind of shift from this mentality of like really striving to accomplish things that I think, like for my kids, for instance, having two young kids, I mean, that's part of what weighs on me too, is just knowing that this is a country that they're inheriting and like, what is that going to look like? I mean, I'm thankful that they're young to the point where they have no concept of politics. They're 2 and 4. So like they have no clue, if they were 10 and 12, like trying to explain this election and the choice that voters made to elect Donald Trump, I think would be kind of a challenging thing to explain. But so I've had to kind of shift from, I was certainly someone during this campaign who put my values very much on my sleeve and tried to explain to people why I thought Trump was such a uniquely dangerous candidate and why returning him to power would be a disaster for the country. And now that people have made the choice to do that, like I'm kind of going back in a journalist mode of like, okay, we have to document the damage here. We have to kind of get the word about what Trump is trying to do, what his people are saying. What's coming down the pike in terms of these nominees or legislation or, draconian budget cuts that they want to accomplish. But I don't think I necessarily have all the answers. I mean, I think I'm still kind of grappling with that. I'm grateful that I'm independent. And so I don't feel kind of cross-pressured or pressures from above editorially to adopt a certain line. But I honestly, as someone who runs a newsletter, I found it a little bit challenging even in this period to not have a newsletter that's 100% doom and gloom. We have our edition tomorrow is looking at, the headline right now, I'm going to change the headline, but it's called The Miracle of Wisconsin. And it's looking at basically how Democrats in Wisconsin, despite some really nasty headwinds, have been able to have a lot of success, including, on the Supreme Court, overcoming a gerrymander that really kind of institutionalized Republican power for a generation. And now, they have a Supreme Court that has a liberal majority, and Democrats have had, there's a Democratic governor. They've had some success in the state assembly and the state Senate. And so, I think we're going to have to kind of look to the states and localities for, progressive wins in this coming, 2 to 4 years. And I just get up every day and kind of put my feet down on the ground, take my kids to daycare and fire up right-wing TV and see what people are talking about. And right now I try not to think about it too much, just kind of document what's happening. And, we have to kind of let the chips fall where they may.
Aaron, it is such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for all the work you do. It's so important. Your newsletter is entitled Public Notice. We can find you on Twitter. We can find you on social media, and you are a light in a dark world right now. So thank you so much. You've been listening to No Holding Back with me, Susan Estrich. I want to take another moment to thank our guest, to thank Aaron for joining me today for such a thought-provoking conversation and such an honest view of what's going on. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch every episode over on our YouTube channel. Please leave a rating and review. I have to ask for that on your chosen platform. It really helps us reach more people. Follow us on X at No Holding Back FM. And for my weekly column, visit our website, estrichgolden.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on No Holding Back.